I'd like to welcome all of you to this 6th annual conference of our society. It's a privilege and pleasure to have all of you here. As part of the inaugural address, I'm going to look at what is the current status of guidelines and regulations for cellular therapy in our country as well as all over the world. Our society has played a very important role in communicating with the government of India as to what should be the pathway ahead. And what you see here is a picture with the Honorable Health Minister of India, Sri Mansukh Mandavia. That's me sitting next to him when he conducted a meeting with 20 of our members. I remember many of you were there. Dr. Sunita was there, Dr. Naina was there, Dr. Vinod, Dr. Rajput, everybody. So not only did the minister have a meeting, but he gave 20 of our members time. The meeting was 1 hour, it went on for over 1.5 hours, but he listened to everybody. So that is the shift that is happening. The health minister of the country gave us time and gave a hearing to 20 of our members. Okay, he listened carefully. And Dr. Sunita, you remember, he listened, Dr. Naina, he listened to you carefully, he asked you questions. He didn't just listen, he actually asked you specific questions. So this picture depicts the shift in the wind, where the government is now listening to members of our society as to what should be the roadmap ahead. So what we need to do is really realign the focus. We need to start using cellular therapy for treatment of patients. For too long, we've just gone on and been critical, criticized. There should be clinical trials, all of that is, unproven, this, that and the other. In this whole picture, we've forgotten the patients. There are patients who could possibly benefit from this, and they are being deprived of the treatments. And that's why I want to show you this picture. All right, this was a corporator, a BJP corporator from Vidisha, who had 2 children with muscular dystrophy, who killed himself, his wife and both the children because he believed his children would not live. This picture summarizes the need for our work. Can you imagine a man killing himself and his whole family? Because he did not know that this can be treated. We have personally treated over 3,000 patients of muscular dystrophy. You just heard a wonderful talk prior to this on how it can help. If this gentleman had known that his children could be treated, he would not have killed himself. So this is the importance of the field. People are dying, and here you have a family that killed itself because they did not know. And why did they not know? They did not know because the people who are looking after the guidelines, regulations, etc., would not let this be available, and our own medical colleagues will not let patients know that this treatment is available. That is the problem. And what is the result? This. Okay, so this is so important to understand the importance of, we are dealing with human lives here. This is a quote that I like, and I'm going to read it slowly. This is from President Theodore Roosevelt. And I'm reading this because a lot of us who do this work, we have to face a lot of criticism, a lot of opposition, a lot of questions. Everything we do gets questions. There are resistance. There are attempts to stop our work, to block our work. And I think this particular quote, the man in the arena, very beautifully describes all of us. It says, it's not the critic who counts. It's not the critic who counts. Not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust, sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at best knows at the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory or defeat. So this beautiful quote by the President of America And I like that part. The credit belongs to the man who's actually in the arena, like all of us are, whose face is marred by dust, sweat, and blood. All right. So it's important to remember what we are doing and its importance. So I'm going to divide my talk into various parts. I'm going to answer many of the questions of our critics. So one of the first things is there's not enough evidence for regenerative medicine. So here is the evidence worldwide. There are almost 290 papers in neurological conditions, in orthopedics, wound healing. There are a whole lot of conditions in which there are many scientific publications. In neurological conditions, which I do again, there are a whole lot of publications, as you can see. Harrison's Principles of Internal Medicine has actually introduced chapters on stem cell therapy, and they mention many of the neurological conditions we are now treating. 3 times in a period of 15 years, the Nobel Prize in Medicine has gone to stem cell therapy. And India has a leadership in this field. Just look at this, in autism, half the papers are from India. In cerebral palsy, muscular dystrophy, spinal cord injury, a big majority of publications come from our country. This should be a matter of pride for us, not a matter of criticism. Then what is the reason for lack of clarity? Why? Why is there so much lack of clarity? The whole problem, the whole confusion is that we do not realize that regenerative medicine has got different components. There are stem cell derived products, there are stem cell procedures, and then of course there's research. Now we have to understand that stem cell derived product, anything that's a product, a drug, a vaccine, requires approval. Okay, but procedures have never historically or now needed or require approval. There is no approval pathway for procedures. Okay, and we are not just saying this, now our government says this, and a court in the United States has said the same thing. I'm going to show you. So basically, you cannot have an equivalence that somebody who manufactures Fruity or Tropicana requires a license to sell it. But when you're taking an orange and making fresh orange juice, you do not require a license for it. All right. Now this distinction is not in people's heads. So when they say your work is not approved, they have to understand that the only thing that needs approval is products. It's not I'm saying it. I'm going to show you how Indian courts say it, how a government of India says that approval is only for products. There is no pathway, there is no mechanism by which procedures can be approved. So when our colleagues say your work is not approved, this is the distinction you have to make to them. And I'm going to clarify on this. And research is a complete separate topic. So then why is there so much opposition? Because it's disruptive. The work we are doing is disruptive. It brings about improvements that people had not even imagined before. And there are many established medical businesses which are threatened by cellular therapy. Also, government regulations have not been able to keep up with the progress. So let's look briefly at, because we have this thing in our head that unless something happens outside, we don't believe it. Okay, we have what I call a colonial hangover, like Dr. Sunita said. When somebody with a white skin comes and talks about something with a tag from Harvard, Stanford, we will believe it, we will worship that person. But when our own people do it, nobody is willing to stand them up, back them up, or even be proud and promote that work. So I'm going to talk a little bit about international regulations. So the first country in the world to come up with a definitive law for regenerative medicine was Japan. And what they did is what we have been asking and what our government is also in the process of doing. They divided practice from clinical research from marketing of products. They brought about 2 separate laws and said that products come under the Revised Pharmaceutical Affairs Act, but practice and clinical research is different. So this, I think, is the model where the rest of the world will eventually be going. Separation of practice from clinical research from marketing of products. Korea as well came out with a law, and in that it actually, if you read it, it says this particular does not apply where a medical doctor performs minimal manipulation. So basically they separated minimal manipulation from the rest of the cell therapy field. Now people keep talking about the United States, and so I'm going to, because we have this thing in our head all over the world. Is it US FDA approved? Okay, because it's like US FDA is God, and when When US FDA approves, the whole world has to approve. And that's ridiculous. And I'm going to talk about that in a moment, about what an American court has to say about the US FDA. But before that, in one state in America, Texas, they have actually come up with a law. This is a law, but it's only in one state, called Charlie's Law, in which they have said that adult stem cells, which is basically autologous stem cells that we take from the patient, they've defined it, are allowed and permitted to be used. Under what conditions? Very beautiful. This law is beautiful. It says you should work in a licensed hospital. They say the physician should be a qualified physician, and you need to take permission from your institutional review board. Just 3 conditions: registered hospital, qualified doctor, and institutional ethics permission. And they said you can do cell therapy with autologous procedures for conditions that they call chronic. Chronic is a condition which does not get cured by, you've tried all other medical means and the condition still persists. So this is now a law in America, but only in one state. Now there's another law in America which is nationwide, that's called the Right to Try Act. And over here, they've said that you can use any procedure or product for a terminal illnesses. It doesn't matter whether it's approved or not. And in fact, cellular therapy comes in this, and there are several cases in America where they've used this for motor neuron disease, ALS, and muscular dystrophy. Now, we are talking about FDA, this whole thing about is it FDA approved. So this is a United States court judgment, and this came in August of 2022, it's recent. It says very clearly there are no FDA approved or disapproved surgical procedures. I'll repeat that. There are no FDA approved or disapproved surgical procedures. Then the next line, it says there are not now, nor have there ever been, any approved new drug applications for surgical treatments. And it says below, the defendants do not fall under the FDA. So this was a case with a stem cell therapy center in California with the FDA. The FDA wanted to shut them down. They were using autologous cells, and this is what the court said. The court said that the defendants do not fall under US FDA. So this whole thing, is it US FDA approved, is a wrong question, because an American court says that autologous procedures do not come under US FDA. All right? I mean, I want to, because, people, I'm sure you've been asked this question, is this US FDA approved? Why is it? So now you do not need US FDA approval. This is a court judgment from America. So what has come in the way of development of cell and stem cell therapy in India? Basically, our problem is that we've got multiple guidelines with completely differing recommendations. I'm going to talk about all of them. From 2007 till 17, we had the ICMR, and now we have the CDSCO that looks after drugs. We have a Drug Technical Advisory Board. We have the Director General Health Services, and now the NMC has got into the act. I mean, they have started making recommendations of what you can and cannot do. And now let me tell you how these oppose each other. It is impossible, because what one says north, the other says south. So look at this. ICMR says that you cannot offer it as therapy. All right. Whereas the Drug Technical Advisory Board says it is inappropriate to intervene from a regulatory angle on routine practices, therapies, surgeries, transplantations done by stem cells for treatment of their own patients. The Drug Technical Advisory Board is a board of the Ministry of Health, which says that you can actually do that. If a doctor doing a practice in the hospital, please note the words, it is inappropriate to intervene from a regulatory angle. All right. It can't be stronger than that. But ICMR says something else. Again, now among the ICMR recommendations, they say you must do the work in a CDSCO certified GMP lab. And guess what the CDSCO says? They say there is no such provision in the Drugs and Cosmetics Act to do it for hospitals. They only do it for manufacturers. So ICMR has got a condition which is impossible to follow. It says get a CDSCO certified GMP lab, and the CDSCO says, well, we have no provision to give it to you, to hospitals and doctors. We only give it to companies who manufacture. Okay, so if you have guidelines that are impossible to follow, then how can somebody tell you you're not following the guidelines? So this is the root of the problem. You have these guidelines that have been made 2007, 2013, 2017. And it's important to note that in 2017, the guidelines were for research and therapy. Now, in 2013, ICMR itself removed the word therapy. In 2017 also, there is no therapy. But in their guidelines, they say you can't do therapy. So you removed it from the title, but in your guidelines, in the forward, you say you can't do therapy. All right. So there is you're talking about something in the guidelines that you've removed yourself from the title. So what is the problem with ICMR guidelines? First, so far permissions have only been given to private companies who branded manufactured stem cells. No hospital, no doctor has got permission from ICMR so far. The registration is tedious, like Dr. Sunita said, it took her 3 years, to just get your ethics committee registered. And to let you know, the All India Institute of Medical Sciences is still not registered with ICMR. The PGIs, PGI Lucknow and Chandigarh, are not registered with ICMR. All right. So you're lucky. Okay, you got it in 3 years. They haven't got it after, and they've applied. Yeah, they've applied, but haven't got it. So any system where, the jewel in a crown is the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, Delhi, right? And they have not been registered. Okay, so there's something wrong in that registration process. Then, like I told you, some of the conditions in the guidelines you can't follow. They're impossible to follow. And you require multiple permissions. Normally, there should be a single pathway. It says you need permission from your own ethics committee, then you need from IC, you need permission from ethics committee of ICMR and CDSCO. This is ridiculous. When a film is to get permission, you go to one censor board. You don't go to censor board A and then go to censor board B and go to censor board C. It doesn't make sense. But the ICMR thing says you have to take permission from this and this and this. So basically, they've made the condition so difficult that it is impossible for doctors and hospitals to follow, and the only people who can do it are private companies who make manufactured stem cells, and we from the society have actually gone and made complaints and showed evidence of a nexus. We don't hide it. We publicly, in writing, complained of the nexus between these companies and us, and saying that there's an intentional effort to prevent doctors and hospitals from doing this work because branded stem cell companies want their products to be sold. Do you understand that? Why would they not want us to use our autologous cells? Because they want if we are using it, nobody's going to buy their products. So that is underlying there. And I'm not just saying it here. We've made several written representations to all members, and action has been taken against some ICMR officials who actually were nexus. Well, they are not in that same post anymore. All right, because of our representations. So now the important distinction between procedure and product has not been made. So this is the problem with ICMR guidelines. Now I'll give you a real life example of how the ICMR guidelines have negatively affected this work. People keep saying, you should do this work for free, stem cell doctors shouldn't charge. Well, here is a hospital, Railway Hospital, Vadodara, where out of 64 legs that were to be amputated, 64 legs were to be amputated, using cellular therapy, they saved 57. This is amazing work. This is work that should get the Nobel Prize, all right? And this work was being done free of cost. And guess what? ICMR stopped this work. Not only ICMR stopped this work, but in the inspection, and we don't have, Dr. Pai not come here, she actually said that publicly. In the inspection of ICMR, they were told, why are you doing research? Buy the cells from this private company. The ICMR official tells railway hospital doctors, do not do this work, buy from a private company. This is the amazing work that they did. Look at this, that leg on the left side, it was supposed to be amputated, saved with cellular therapy, 57 legs. And what has happened now? Look at this. This is the railway, this thing which says, project stopped in November by ICMR. For what? For registration of hospital ethics committee. Dr. Sunita, you spoke of the struggle. This work was stopped because the hospital ethics committee did not get recognized. All right? Which means that now legs which were being saved are being amputated. When I talked to Dr. Dipali, he says that earlier we were saving these legs and now they are being amputated. So we have regulations that instead of saving lives and limbs are resulting in loss of life and limbs. So this work was stopped by the ICMR. Now, but that's good news. That was the not good news. That's the past. But things are changing. There is a shift in the wind. The very fact that the Health Minister of India gave 20 of us an hour and a half means there is a shift that's happening. So first is the CDSCO, which has been very progressive and supportive. Again, Dr. Sunita said that the DCGI gave you approval. You know, when the ICMR, they gave you approval, which is good because they are the progressive ones. By the way, CDSCO is the real regulatory body. Let me tell you, ICMR is not a regulatory body. ICMR is a research association. In fact, it is registered as a society. It has zero regulatory powers. Zero. Okay? It pretends to regulate. It has zero. It cannot do a thing to you. ICMR cannot come to your doorstep and do anything. They bullied the railway hospital because railway hospital was government and they were government. But they do not have the authority. The authority is with CDSCO through the Drugs and Cosmetics Act. They are the regulators. So what they have done, and they have actually, under the definition of new drug, included stem cell derived product. A very progressive move. Okay, because now you've separated Fruity and Tropicana from homemade orange juice. Okay, that's what they've done. And they've given a very clear definition in subsequent documents of what are stem cell derived products and what are not. So this is the first progressive move. Then we have something called the Drug Technical Advisory Board, which is of the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. And this includes very important people. This includes the Director General of Health Services, the Drug Controller General of India, various other directors, and including a representative from ICMR. And what they said was, I'm going to read this carefully, that routine practices, transplantations, surgeries, therapies undertaken by doctors involving stem cells for treatment of their own patients and not for commercialization of the same outside the hospital fall outside of the purview of the Drugs and Cosmetics Act. So the work that we are talking about, that you heard in the morning, the wonderful work, it is outside of the purview of the Drugs and Cosmetics Act. All right. Then they also say, which this already I showed you earlier, that it is inappropriate to intervene from a regulatory angle on routine practices, therapies, surgeries, transplantations undertaken by registered medical practitioners, doctors, in their clinics, hospitals involving such stem cells for treatment of their patients based on their medical expertise. All right. Now this is a statutory body of the Ministry of Health of the Government of India that is saying it is inappropriate to intervene from a regulatory angle. This is for doctors practicing stem cells in their hospitals. Okay, so this again, a distinction has been made. Lately, we've had the involvement of the Director General of Health Services from the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, and the two following documents have been prepared by the DGHS in January 2022. So one of them is an SOP for control and monitoring of practices and procedures involving cell or stem cell based preparation for therapeutic purposes. So they've now actually a standard operating procedure that will be there that will control and monitor practices. And they've also come up with a list of practices and procedures for cell or stem cell preparations for therapeutic purposes as identified by experts other than what is provided by ICMR. So the SOP has the following. It's got purpose, it's got a procedure for processing, it lists what kind of premise you should have, what kind of personnel, their qualifications, what permission, and also if you don't follow this, what will be the punishment. I've just listed it because they're all P's, so just to make it interesting. But it's actually exactly like that. I've just taken this straight from the SOP. You can see here, this is of the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, so this is, you can see on the top, the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. So that's the purpose, that's the procedure for presentation, that's the premise requirements, the qualifications, the registration of ethics committee, SOFA, and mechanism for regulatory action. Now, this is another important document. This is the list of practices and procedures involving cell or stem cell based preparations and purposes as identified by experts. So what they've done in this list, this is interesting if you see this, they have divided this based on level of evidence. So for things for which there is level 1 and level 2 evidence, they have made this standard of care. Please note this. Alright, so what is included in that? Diabetic foot, osteoarthritis, tendinopathy, skin rejuvenation, multiple sclerosis, wounds, and avascular necrosis. So they've listed the source of the stem cells on the left side, whether it's autologous bone marrow or whether it is SVF. They've listed the clinical condition. They've actually mentioned the level of evidences. In the third column, how many papers are there? And then they've said whether it will be standard of care or not. Now the next thing they've done, and this is very interesting, this is very novel, this is very unique, and it's happened for the first time in our country. This has never happened before. They've introduced what is called clinical option. So for conditions like autism, kidney diseases, spinal cord injury, cerebral palsy, stroke, drug resistance, tuberculosis, COPD, alopecia, erectile dysfunction, they've actually said that this can be a clinical option. So this is the first time that we now have a clinical option. So what is the difference between clinical option and standard of care? In clinical option, so standard of care, you can just do practice. Okay, you can just do it as you would do any other practice. For clinical option, you need permission from a registered ethics committee and you need to take informed consent of the patient. Just that's the only difference between the two. That you need, so standard of care, no ethics permission, you just do it. But clinical option, you need a registered ethics committee and informed consent. And then they've listed a whole lot of things which are what is called under development and under research. So there are 3 categories now: standard of care, clinical option, and under development. So now this, so basically what they've done is they've put a green, an orange, and a red light. So level 1, level 2 evidence, standard of care; level 2, 3, and 4 evidence, clinical option; and if there's no evidence, it is clinical research. Now what do the Indian courts have to say? All right, we heard what the American court had to say. What does the Indian court have to say? So there was this judgment in the High Court of India. There were total of 12 petitions, and they were all put together, and the Delhi High Court passed a judgment. I want, just please read this very carefully. It says, while treatment using stem cells is permissible, treatments using stem cell derived product requires a license. I mean, how more clear can you get? This is the High Court of New Delhi. Then it says, stem cell derived products treatment being administered cannot be allowed to be discontinued. Okay, the treatment presently cannot be allowed to be discontinued, and therefore it concluded, we allow the petitioners to continue such treatment. Okay, so this is the Delhi High Court judgment, September 2019. All right, so for people who talk of the legality of what we do, who decides what's legal? The courts in India. And the High Court says, I'm going to read this again because it's so important. Treatment using stem cells is permissible, but treatment using stem cell derived product requires a license. All right? And it said petitioners are allowed to continue. In fact, if you read that second part, it says, treatment presently being administered to these petitioners cannot be allowed to be discontinued, as such discontinuation is likely to have life-threatening consequences. So it's important that we know all of this. Now, people talk of ethics, so I want to talk a little bit about the ethical point of view. So people talk without knowing what they're talking. When you say something is not legal, you should know the law. Okay. When you should say something is not ethical, you should know what is ethical. So the Bible of ethics worldwide, the Bible, the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita is one thing only. The World Medical Association's Declaration of Helsinki, ethical principles for medical research involving human subjects. And what it says, that in the treatment of an individual patient where proven interventions do not exist or known interventions have been ineffective, the physician, with taking informed consent of the patient, may use an unproven intervention. All right. So a lot of the work that we do is, when do we do it? I'm sure Dr. Sunita, Dr. Naina, you do not first time, when a patient comes, you don't use it first time, you've tried everything else. And then we go ahead and use cellular therapy. So that's what it says. You may use a treatment that may not be proven. However, if in the physician's judgment, it offers hope of saving life, re-establishing health, or alleviating suffering. Very nicely said. If it offers hope, it's just talking of offering hope of either saving life, re-establishing health, or alleviating suffering. However, what it says is, this should be made the object of research, and it should be designed to evaluate the safety and efficacy. In all these cases, new information must be recorded and made publicly available. And we've heard from the wonderful speakers in the morning how they've made their work available through scientific publications, and that's the way to go. So now it's ethical to do what we do. Are we treating patients who have other treatment options directly with cell therapy? No. We are only treating patients who have no other treatment option. Now, there is an International Society for Cellular Therapy, and amongst many things, they talk of something that we all have forgotten in this debate, and that is the patient's fundamental right to health. Okay, so here's what it says. Patients seeking medical treatment for cellular therapies have the following rights that must be respected by the healthcare providers and all others associated. The right to seek treatment. Patients and their families have the right to seek treatment for their diseases, and no entity should withhold this fundamental right unless there's a high probability of harm. Okay, so when you deprive a patient of this, you are taking away a fundamental right. And we have forgotten this in the debate between the regulatory bodies and us and our colleagues. What about the patient, right? So that's the fundamental problem. A coin has two sides, okay? But the people who are opposed to us just see one. And some too also tend to see one. But a coin doesn't work if it is one-sided. You need to have both sides of the coin. So I want to talk about, because the people who criticize us talk of the legality of what we do, they talk of it being approved, not approved, they talk of it being unproven, and they question the ethics. So I hope with this presentation, I've made it very clear. The High Court of New Delhi says it is permissible. Is there any question of legality? All right. You have the Drug Technical Advisory Board, you have, a Ministry of Health and Family Welfare with documents that say that this work can be done. So I think the question of legality is out. There is absolutely nothing not legal with the work we do, because there is no law any of us have broken. See, for some things, there are laws. Like for your PNDT, there is a law that says you cannot do sex determination. There is no law that says you cannot do this. So we have to be very careful when we use words like that. What we are doing is with the ambit of the existing law. People talk of approved or not approved. Again, only products can be approved. You cannot approve procedures. Third, proven or unproven. I was at a meeting in England, at a university, a meeting that had been called just to criticize us. Okay. And I was there. We had a gynecologist, Dr. Geeta Shroff. You must be knowing her. She was there in the meeting. I had my colleague, Dr. Hung Wang from China, and we were there. And I asked at the meeting, there were all these big people from England. They had called us to criticize us. And I asked them one question. I said, you keep talking of something being unproven. Can you give me the definition of proven? And you know what? The chairman of the regulatory body said, there is no definition of proven. He stood up and said, there is no definition of proven. So when you say something is unproven, how can you say it's unproven where there is no... Does anybody know a definition of proven? What does it take? 1, 2, 5, 10? There is nothing. Okay. So this question of it being unproven, but I've shown you that I started, what did I start my lecture with? Publications in the field, in dozens and hundreds. So when you have so many publications of level 1 and level 2 evidence, which not just we are saying, I don't know if you read that list of practices and procedures. The government of India has put level 1, level 2 evidences for various conditions and level 3 and level 4 for others. The government has put these evidences. So we cannot say. And ethical, I showed you very clearly, in accordance with the Helsinki Declaration, which is the gold standard for ethics. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing unethical about the work that we do. The only thing is, if you're doing it as a clinical option, you need to have a registered institutional ethics committee, because in our country, what is ethical or not ethical is not decided by the government of India, but is decided by the Institutional Ethics Committee. They have been given the mandate The mandate under the Drugs and Cosmetics Act has been given that the Institutional Ethics Committee will decide what is ethical and what is not ethical. So if you have approval of your Institutional Ethics Committee, you are doing ethical work. I just like to share the views of our Honorable Prime Minister, Sri Narendra Modi ji, on stem cells. You know, when he was the Chief Minister of Gujarat, he actually created a 90 crore stem cell facility in Surat in the civil hospital. This is that building, and for years after that, till COVID, this building was a khandar. Nothing happened in that building. It was his dream, his vision to start cell therapy, over there, a dedicated building which remained empty. You know why? Because the guidelines of ICMR would not permit this work. Our Honorable Prime Minister's dream remained a skeletal building like this. This building is still today called this, in COVID, they painted it and converted this building into a COVID center, but it is still called stem cell therapy, stem cell building. Okay. It became, so it's now, well, at least the building got used for COVID, but it's empty once again. So here, when he was inaugurating this building,
आज हम देश की सेवा में एक और कदम आगे बढ़ रहे हैं। मित्रों, मैं विज्ञान को तो ज्यादा समझता भी नहीं, जानता भी नहीं, लेकिन शायद आज से 40-50 वर्ष पहले किसी ने स्टेम सेल्स ट्रीटमेंट की चर्चा की होती तो लोगों को बड़ा अजूबा लगा होगा कि कैसे संभव होगा, ये तो हवा की बातें हैं सब वगैरह। अब आज लेबोरेटरी में सिद्ध हो रहा है, लेबोरेटरी हो सकता है अमेरिका की हो, लेकिन ये सिद्ध हो रहा है। और दूसरा एक, जब मैंने जाना कि स्टेम सेल के माध्यम से इस समस्या का समाधान हो सकता है, और इसलिए अरबों खरबों रुपया सरकार की तिजोरी से खर्च करके सूरत में ये सेंटर हम खड़ा कर रहे हैं, ताकि मेरे उन ट्राइबल बच्चों को, आने वाली पीढ़ियों को इस भयानक पीड़ा से हम मुक्ति दिला सकें।
Prime Minister, when he was Chief Minister, inaugurating, you can see the building is the background, the picture I showed you. Okay, this was a speech in 2011, before he became the Prime Minister, although the building started construction, but no work happened. So when he went to Japan, he took time out to visit Professor Yamanaka, who we know won the Nobel Prize in stem cell research. He actually, of all his engagements, took time out to visit a stem cell facility. Even in India, he's gone to the Bangalore, the National Center for Biological Sciences, to discuss stem cells. And when this government came to power, they declared the intention of the government in what is called the President's Address to Parliament. And in the section of research, they have said, my government will build world-class research centers in the fields of nanotechnology, material sciences, thorium technology, brain research, and stem cells. So among the 5 areas of focus of Honorable Prime Minister Sri Narendra Modi ji, stem cells is one of the areas. I'm very fortunate that in a book that I have written, the Honorable Prime Minister has actually written an introduction. It's very rare to have an introduction from, Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji, and he's actually written an introduction for my book, and it's a real honor, it's a real distinction. And what he writes in the book is very beautiful. He says the birth of a child brings with it so much hope and positivity. Okay, but when a child has a medical disease or disorder after that, the same thing becomes into a nightmare. And he talks of how modern technology can help this. And this is myself presenting that book to the Honorable Prime Minister. And he did inquire about the state of stem cells. He had said that he wanted, I'll tell you his exact words. बहुत समय से मेरे मन में विचार था कि मैं आप स्टेम सेल वालों के साथ कुछ चर्चा करूं. Exact words, quote unquote. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, that he wanted to actually have a discussion on stem cells with us. And this is a speech that the Honorable Prime Minister made in Parliament on stem cells.
मैं जापान गया, तो जापान मेरे कार्यक्रम में मैंने एक कार्यक्रम क्या जोड़ा, मैं वहाँ एक नोबेल लॉरिएट साइंटिस्ट यामाहा को मिलने गया. मैं इसलिए किया गया कि उन्होंने स्टेम सेल के अंदर जो रिसर्च की है, मैंने जितना पढ़ा था तो मेरे मन में आया था शायद इनकी एक खोज हमारे काम आ सकती है क्या. हम गए तो वहां गए, उनसे चर्चा की, और बेंगलोर के हमारे साइंस इंस्टीट्यूट के साथ आज उस दिशा में हमारा काम हो रहा है कि स्टेम सेल्स के द्वारा हमारे युवा साइंटिस्ट कुछ खोज करें.
So there, the Honorable Prime Minister of India talking in the Indian Parliament. There can be no more sacred space in a democracy than the Indian Parliament. He's talking about stem cells. All right. And now I'd like to end with, for us, of course, there's nothing more important than a Prime Minister. But because we have this obsession with what Western countries, a similar talk given by the President of the United States, President Obama, on stem cells.
Today, with the executive order I am about to sign, we will bring the change that so many scientists and researchers, doctors and innovators, patients and loved ones have hoped for and fought for these past 8 years. We will lift the ban on federal funding for promising embryonic stem cell research. Scientists believe these tiny cells may have the potential to help us understand and possibly cure some of our most devastating diseases and conditions, to regenerate a severed spinal cord and lift someone from a wheelchair, to spur insulin production and spare a child from a lifetime of needles, to treat Parkinson's, cancer, heart disease, and others that affect millions of Americans and the people who love them. There's no finish line in the work of science. The race is always with us. The urgent work of giving substance to hope,
and
answering those many bedside prayers,
substance to
seeking
hope.
a day when words like terminal and incurable
are finally retired
from our vocabulary.
With those words, I'd like to end my talk. I just want to thank you for your attention and thank you.